So in the first half of this video, I'm going to talk about dividend stability in general and talk about why a company might increase or decrease the dividend. This is something that applies at any time, but I think it's helpful to understand. In the second half of the video, I'll talk about how stable dividends can actually be during this time. And I'll put a timestamp below if you want to jump straight to that. So there's been a lot of talk about just how stable dividends can be over this period. And while we don't know for sure yet, I thought it'd be a good time to just go over dividend stability as a whole in general anyway, because knowing this is just a good primer to dividend investing anyway. So this won't apply if you're just investing in exchange traded funds. It's only if you're investing in single stocks. And so while this video will talk very generally about dividend stability, it is a financial topic. So just reminding you before you make any financial decisions, everybody's financial position, their risk tolerance, their investment goals are all different. So make sure you do your own research or seek professional advice before making any changes. So before I choose to invest in a company, there are a few different criteria that I look at. And one of the things I like to look at is how stable the dividend has been. Stability is actually way more important to me than yield because I like to know upfront what to expect. So generally I look for dividend consistency in two specific areas. The first is how consistent the company is at paying at the same time each year. So you want to know that if a company pays in, say, February and August, that they're going to continue to do so in the future so that you can predict when your payments are going to come in. This is important for a couple of reasons, obviously because you want to know when you get paid, but also you want to know how reliable the company is in managing its cash flow. The second consistent thing you want to look for is that the dividend is the same or more preferably growing year on year. So it makes no sense to invest in a company where the dividend payments are just so inconsistent, you just never know what they're going to pay next. You want those nice, boring, stable dividend payments. So how do you find the dividend stability? Now, sometimes the dividend stability will be shown as a percentage. I like it when this happens because it's easier to figure out. It is important to know that not all trading accounts will show this figure though. But if it doesn't, it's easy to work out yourself anyway. So generally the dividend stability number is a percentage of how stable that dividend has been in the past. Generally, I like to look for a dividend stability of 90% or higher. 100% dividend stability means the dividend never changes, so it's the same all of the time. So you want a little bit of leeway there. It's also important to note that a dividend can be stable and falling at the same time. Like it could be, say, a 90% dividend, but if it's consistently going down, it's still stable, it's just going down, so you don't want that. So if your trading account doesn't show this figure, it's pretty easy to just eyeball it yourself. So you just go over to the dividend page and check what the previous dividends have been for that company. So what you're looking for is if they've been consistent in paying in the same months and also consistency in the amount that they've been paying. I like to look at a period of at least 2 years, but more preferably 5 or so. So the ideal here is to look for a stable dividend that's growing over time, because that means your income is also going to be growing over time. So which is better, a dividend that's the same each time or one that's growing? Well, I've kind of already answered this. Obviously, having a stable dividend is important, but you do want some growth. Life is going to get way more expensive, so you want to know that your income is going to increase over time as well. It doesn't matter if they're growing just by a small amount or a large amount, although I'd be cautious if they were continuously growing at a large amount because that's probably not going to be sustainable. And it's fine if a company stays the same, very consistent for a year or so and then starts growing gradually and then stays consistent and then starts growing. That's perfectly fine as well. It is important to remember to ignore special dividends during this time because they are obviously not consistent payments, they're one-off payments. So let's look at two scenarios where a company might increase or decrease the dividend. We'll start with the more positive one. Why would a company increase the dividend? So obviously the best reason is that the company is increasing its profits and earnings over time. So when the company grows and makes more money, it can give that money back to shareholders. The second reason for increasing the dividend might be that a company, instead of using that money to grow the business for further expansion, that they choose to instead pay the shareholders. So the reason that they might not use the money for future expansion could be any number of reasons. It could be just that there is no future growth opportunities for the company, and that's something to watch out for. It could be that they're just trying to attract more investors to the company. Now, using dividend payments to attract investors isn't a bad thing because the more investors there are in the company, the more the company can grow down the line. However, if there is no future growth opportunities for the company, that could be a red flag. So what about a company decreasing the dividend, which is could be possible right now. The reason that a company would reduce or even stop dividends is because they're no longer producing a profit. It might also be that there's instability into the company. There are actually even positive reasons why a company would want to lower the dividend. Perhaps it's looking to expand its growth or just to hold on to the earnings of the company during rough patches like now. So after this is over, if you do find a company that's increasing the dividends, what do you look out for? Well, you want to understand why they're doing it. Like, first and the best reason is that they're a profitable company and they're growing their earnings year on year. Attracting new investors is also a reasonable explanation, but if they're doing it for limited growth potential, that's where you got to be careful. Usually you can figure this out yourself by knowing what the company does. So this is why it's really important to understand the companies that you're investing in and knowing what they do. Obviously, some companies are easier to figure out than others. You know what banks do, you know what Apple sells, you know what Amazon does. It's actually a very good sign if a company is a household name. But even if it's not, it's actually worth going in and actually seeing what that company does. Then you can actually think about whether that company has growth potential in the future. And if you really don't understand the company or what it does, maybe it's not the best investment for you. Just move on to the next one and it might be a better fit. So we've talked about the reasons why a company would either reduce or stop a dividend, and the primary reason was either reduced profits or instability within the company. And there's no more unstable time than right now. Europe has placed a ban on dividends and there's a lot of other countries that are stopping dividends, but Australia has not done that yet. There are some sectors, particularly in the travel and tourism industry, that have either deferred the dividend payment or cut it altogether. Flight Centre cancelled its dividend payment so that it could keep paying staff, and Qantas deferred their dividend payment that they were going to pay in April, but they're now paying in September instead. Macquarie Bank said that it predicted about 40% of Australian listed businesses would cut or reduce their dividend payment. That sounds about right. But if you are a dividend investor, then you're likely to be going for the high dividend companies anyway. So that's likely to be the banks, the utility companies, consumer goods. Utility companies are likely to be okay during this period. Consumer goods companies will probably suffer. Their profitability will have gone down. But then again, it depends on what the company actually produces and makes. But let's talk about the banks. In terms of the banks, there's currently quite a lot of pressure on them to either defer or cut the dividend. But as of yet, none of the banks have announced any of these changes. Prime Minister Scott Morrison said that there was no plans to cut planned dividends from the banks. And the government and the Reserve Bank have put measures in place to help support banks during this time anyway. And they're encouraging to continue to lend. APRA, the regulation authority, has said that at this stage they're leaving it up to the banks to make the decision. We do know they'll be slightly lower because New Zealand has suspended their dividends and they make up about 10% of our bank's dividends. So they'll be about 10% lower just from that. So for the time being, bank dividends are still going ahead, mostly because I think especially retirees at this stage use dividend payments as their income. So if the bank dividend is cut and the retirees lose that income, that means there's potentially going to be quite a lot of people wanting to go onto the welfare system. And that potentially will cause more problems for the government, which is why they're going to encourage and try and help banks during this time to keep that dividend. So are all dividends stable right now? No, nothing is stable right now. But investing never was a short-term game. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Take care, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.